But one of the things that people run into is that there's just so much stuff.
Do you ever feel like there are too many video games, but not enough time to play them? It's not just you. In 2024, almost 19,000 games were published on Steam. According to SteamDB.info, 14,738 of those games were limited, meaning they aren't promoted. That still leaves just over 4,000 games for the platform to recommend. And remember, that's just from last year. If you're a smaller game developer, you're also up against AAA releases with monster marketing budgets, popular games from years ago, and that's before you get to free-to-play titles, which are really good at keeping players engaged for months. When you add all that together, you get a problem called discoverability.
You as an indie developer are one of those titles in a sea of potential games that might interest an audience. You're competing for people's eyes on your product. Even if you make a beautiful, well-polished, really fun game, you've got to carve out your space in the market and try and identify ways that you can get your game in front of the relevant audience.
Is there just a sense that it's much harder to find your audience than it used to be?
When you look at storefronts and distributors like Steam, they will use algorithms to recommend games to players that they think they'll like. However, they have very limited data on what the games are that a player might like or why a player liked it.
Yeah, so I guess it goes off sort of data points rather than vibes, for want of a better word.
However, in the book world, there's apps like Storygraph, which asks their readers to give a little bit more information in their reviews about why they liked it, such as the mood, the pacing of the book, how long it was. So it's got more information on why readers enjoyed that. And we're kind of missing that from any games storefronts.
Ludocene is described as a dating app that matches you with games rather than people. We jumped on a call with project lead Andy Robertson for a demo.
Each of the games in our database is represented as a card. You can click on the front to see a little trailer, and you can flip it over, and then you can see prices, and there'll be discount prices displayed here. If we've played A Short Hike, then immediately at the bottom we get a couple of suggestions. And maybe we don't fancy that game, so we discard it. This next card then is kind of testing our taste. So it's offering us a different sort of game to the one we've already chosen, to sort of say, oh, would you like this? And I could say, okay, yeah, and I enjoy that. And then we're kind of off into hunting for games we like. And in that way, we build up our little deck of cards there, which represents our gaming tastes. And what's nice is if we hover our finger over each of these cards, these suggestions, the ones we've picked in our played favourites section, they move to indicate how much influence those games have had on these suggestions down the bottom. And the larger the card, the bigger the influence.
Ludocene's recommendations are hand-picked by a panel of experts, journalists, streamers, podcasters. One of those is Brian Crescente. He founded gaming website Kotaku, co-founded Polygon, and has also covered games for Rolling Stone and Variety.
Do you feel like a lot of stuff is kind of algorithmically driven now, like the Steam storefront and recommendations we get on YouTube? Do you feel like they do a good job for a lot of people, or are there kind of drawbacks there that Ludocene might be addressing?
This gets into a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is, it's sort of, I think there's three aspects to it. First off, there is search out there. Like when you go onto the internet and you do a search, it is so over controlled by Google and SEO, search engine optimization, that it's very hard to get organic results. And then you have, as you mentioned, you've got algorithms in some stores, which, they do their best. But as you pointed out, 19,000 games in 1 year, I don't think an algorithm is really going to solve that problem. And then I think the third issue is that in general, the number of video game journalism sites out there are sort of, a lot of them have been closing down. What I think we're seeing is sort of this drop in the type of journalism and coverage that we used to see in video games. And then on top of that, you have this flood of new games coming out. And that's in part because of things like, Unreal Engine and Unity dropping the cost for game development. and other things that are making game development easier. So you have this sort of rising tide of video games coming out, and then a drop in the type of people and the way people cover video games, and it's sort of a perfect storm for not knowing what to play.
As somebody who's worked in games journalism, this is my slightly devil's advocate question, by the way. You'll there's sometimes been let's call it a sort of a tense relationship between the general public and experts, be that games journalists or whatever.
Right.
Do you think that could have an effect on the perception of Ludocene, or do you think maybe the medium being slightly different might kind of minimize that a little bit?
I think that there's a couple things that Ludocene does that will kind of minimize that. One is you don't have to use any experts. So you could just ignore it, and it's still a very useful app. What it does, it doesn't need experts to do. The expert is sort of, in my mind, is like an added bonus. And then the other thing is it's not like all or nothing. You don't have to say, I want to use all the experts. You could say, I hate Brian. I'm not going to use Brian as an expert. Or you could say, I love Brian. So being able to like add those filters, sort of in my mind is how they work. Being able to take them or add them or subtract them, I think will get rid of any issues like that.
So what does our game developer think?
I think overall it looks really exciting. So when you've got expertly curated lists, the hope is that that will be a much better jumping off point for an algorithm to work out, oh, why are these games similar? Why would a player enjoy these other games that are on the list? Some of my hesitation is in it being a dating style app. So it's a binary swipe. One way if you want to add the game to your list, and the other way if you want to ignore it. And the worry there is if you ignore a particular game, is that going to cut out a whole bunch of other games that the algorithm has deemed similar? One of the other potential issues is the size of the data set. If you're going to represent the diversity of games for a big market, how quickly or how vast can you make that data set to make it really effective? And especially maintaining an audience continually using your app and not just getting recommended the same games.
We asked Andy for a response to all that. Having the sort of human curation element of it, does that put a bit of a limit on, as you mentioned, so many games come out, and even though you've got a paddle of experts who've played a lot of games, they obviously can't play all of them. Is that going to restrict the recommendations it could put back to people?
Yeah, I think we can cover things pretty well. And what the experts do, they help us identify where we've got blind spots. So we have a particular tendency to look at one game or another, and we want to have really wide coverage. And so as we kind of bring in more experts with different tastes, and we're looking to really vary that and have a real good diversity in terms of who we're offering, we're finding they're like, oh, I must add this, and these games, and they're maybe not there yet. And so those would be the first games to add to our list as analysts work through that. So I think we're pretty well covered, but it is a massive challenge, and it's dependent on having enough time, which is why the Kickstarter is quite exciting, because it's going to help us do that.